Let's talk about sex today. Welcome to the art and science of difficult conversations, where we believe when you communicate better, you live better. As always, I'm one of your co hosts, Chris. I own Leadership Potential, where I help leaders navigate difficult conversations and relationships.
And I'm Lucie, owner of Mind Factory Mental Fitness Gym for leaders, their teams, and families. And I'm excited about our topic today.
I love when the topics we talk about bring in some of my other work too. Because I've mentioned that I'm a therapist as well, and I got my start working with sex offending behaviors. And so I've talked a lot about sex, not necessarily in the context of relationships, what we're talking about today, but certainly having to talk a lot about sex and psychoeducation around that stuff. So today we're excited to have with us Jannine MacKinnon, a certified sex, love, and relationship coach that's been working in this field for half a decade. Jannine, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, Jannine, this is not a topic that people are easily talking about for most, and I'll just say in the
hmm
Western culture for sure. Um, Tell us how you got involved in this topic, how you got involved in this field of work.
Yes, for me, it started with a personal journey. I was in online marketing actually for many,
Hmm.
many years. And then I had my kids. They're a year and a half apart. It was very quick going through marriage, babies, and I hit a point where it felt like my body was no longer my own. It looked different, it behaved different. My relationship felt very disconnected and resentful. I didn't really know who I was at this point in time in my life. And so I set out to reclaim myself. I really took that self responsibility, looking around. This isn't what I want family life to be. And so it started with a weekly date night with myself. And that's every Sunday. I still hold that weekly date night. I recommend it to everyone on their sensual embodiment journey. And for me, it's Sundays after my kids go to bed. They're 5 and 7 now. I will do different embodiment practices or journaling, meditation, different things like that. And that's what led me down the road to the world of sacred sexuality. And it just made such an impact on my life. I didn't expect this is what I would be doing at all. I was more like, oh, women's empowerment, helping them step into their own. But what I found is the biggest transformation comes through the taboo. And sex
Hmm.
is a huge taboo. And so when we can face the like shame and guilt and fear that we have around sex in those very vulnerable moments, those vulnerable pieces of ourselves, it has this ripple effect throughout all areas of our life. If we can speak for our wants, our needs, our desires inside the bedroom, it's so much easier to do it outside of the bedroom as well. And so I just found this is what I am meant to do. So here we are.
Did you grow up comfortable talking about sex, or was it also for you just a taboo topic also that took you time to get comfortable being
Yeah,
open
for
about?
me, it was like indifference and
Hmm.
comfort around it. I think my mom did an amazing job at giving me like the sex talk.
Hmm.
And I knew all the information when it came to like how our bodies work, how to have take birth control, don't get pregnant, don't have STDs, all of these different things. And I was kind of that girl in the friend group where my friends would come to me and I would like teach them
Hmm.
about their menstrual cycle and about birth control and things like that. So there was openness around that. And I'm very grateful to not have the shame tied to it. That said, I feel like it was quite clinical. And I think a big piece that is missing in modern sex education is really the like sacredness around it, that it really
Hmm.
is something special. And I think with having that missing, often we put ourselves in positions that aren't necessarily right for us. They're not necessarily pleasurable. We're just kind of doing, say, wifely duty as an example, or just going along with things because we like the person. This is what we should be doing,
Hmm.
but we're not aware of how much pleasure we can be receiving, how special this should feel for us. And if that was a big part of sex education, I think things would be a lot different and there would be a lot more empowerment and pleasure all around when it comes to sex.
And I feel like it's all so entwined about that taboo aspect, like
Mm-hmm.
let's not talk about it at all. including like the pleasurable and sacred aspect of it. Why do you think it's so taboo for so many people and cultures to not talk about sex openly?
Yeah, I think religion often plays a very big role. That's something I see with my clients, is that they can carry a lot of shame based on those religious belief systems, often mostly in Western culture, as well as families. It's being passed down generationally that we don't talk about things. You don't do that. And even for families where they don't necessarily have the shame tied around it, often we don't talk about that. Go in your room, shut it out. And just the act of shutting those things down, refusing to say vagina and getting really uncomfortable, even hearing that word, no, we don't talk about that. That in itself adds shame to it. It feels like it's wrong because we can't just talk about these things openly. And then there are other family dynamics where there actually is verbally saying how wrong sex is and that we shouldn't be feeling pleasure, that it's just to procreate.
Yeah, that's difficult because then we are also creating the internal conversations in our
Yeah.
heads. What would you say are some of the difficult conversations that you see women are having?
A big thing I see, especially in long-term relationships, which is where I tend to focus on, is with those internal conversations, sex becomes this big weight that they carry. And so the dynamic that tends to play out is over time with family dynamics, having kids, being with your partner for 5, 10, 20 plus years, that drive starts to fade. The libido starts to fade. And often I like to say that that's a symptom of something else off. Having a low libido isn't necessarily what the issue is. It's showing you that there's an issue somewhere. And so that could be with just regular day-to-day stress, struggling with work, struggling with family issues or health issues. That can be a part of it. There's also that emotional connection, the non-sexual physical connection are really big pieces of the puzzle. And so when those are missing, the libido then tends to drop. And so the dynamics that tend to come into play there is often one partner has that higher libido, and so they want sex more and make more of those advances. And the other one tends to feel more guilt because they don't have that drive. They want to. They generally love their partner. They want to make them happy. They want to feel turned on by them. And so there's a lot of guilt going on. And then often there's kind of an internal timer that's like, okay, like this much time has passed. I really need to kind of do my duty. I want to keep them happy. This is what marriage or long-term relationships is supposed to look like. So they have their intimate experiences and that kind of resets the clock. There's a little bit of relief there that, okay, we can wait a while for this. But just doing that and not having their pleasure matter is reinforcing within their nervous system to shut down during sex. So that has a spiraling effect. But those internal conversations is just really a lot of guilt over it. And that carries quite a heavy weight. And so there's further disconnection when the partner goes to make an advance or just show connection and love. There's automatically that internal expectation tied to it, that obligation. And so there's that shutdown. And then the other partner feels rejected. So then they make those advances less. And so it's really creating more and more disconnection. And I just find this negative spiral that just makes that disconnection grow more and more, unfortunately.
And I'm wondering, because I get annoyed in lots of guy groups that I'm in, I get annoyed when they automatically assume the women have lower libidos than the men, when it can be either, right? It's either party could have less libido or high libido, or both could have low, or both could have high. And so how do you see like the societal expectations of what should look like weighing on people as they approach this conversation and these relationships?
Oh, that's such a great question. And unfortunately, I feel like these societal norms or expectations make people feel like they're broken. That's what I see a lot, is because sex and intimacy is portrayed a certain way in media. Generally, the man has a high libido. He needs to sow his seeds, have his needs met. The woman does her duty. Then there's also, when there is passion, what sex tends to look like is, oh, it's lustful, it's passionate, quick kissing, grab a boob, penetration, come together. Ooh, okay, what an amazing experience. And sex doesn't actually generally look like that at all, and having both people really pleasured. So that in itself, people think something's wrong with them when that isn't the case. And I'm glad you touched on the general men's side as well, because again, if men don't have that like higher libido, or don't necessarily stay hard and strong the whole way through, they feel like something's wrong with them. And I really feel for guys that generally, as women, our bodies don't necessarily show that we're getting caught up in our head. We can still go along with things, and our partner might not necessarily notice. But for men who have a penis, like, you can tell if you're getting caught up in your head and distracted. And so I feel for you. And so just putting it out there that, like, that's normal. That doesn't mean anything's wrong with either side, because I do find the partner will then tend to feel like, oh, something's wrong with them that this happened.
So how do you recommend couples start even approaching this conversation? Because again, everybody's coming from, everybody's got either the societal pressures and the relationship pressures and their family pressures, and maybe religious pressures if they've got that going on. How do you recommend couples start that conversation together?
Well, first and foremost, start the conversation outside the bedroom. That is like the top tip. When you're inside the bedroom, like, it's super vulnerable, and there can already kind of be that expectation of how things are going. And when things are brought up, it cuts a little bit deeper. So have these conversations outside the bedroom first and foremost. And really speak from a point of, like, we're a team, and this is what I'm desiring. It's not, you don't do this, you don't make me feel this way, why don't you do this more? I think that's where a lot of people kind of mess up, and often it's because these things have been buried for so long. And so it builds and builds and builds and kind of explodes in more of an attack kind of way. But in relationships, we're a team. We really want each other to be happy, I believe, for the most part. Like, of course, there's other dynamics at play, and that's something else to look at. But for most that are committed, they want to do well for each other. So come from that team aspect outside of the bedroom. Speak for your wants, needs, and desires, and provide a roadmap. I think that's really important. And also where people get stuck is they desire to feel a certain way, but how do I do that? And a lot of people don't necessarily know how to do that themselves as well. So you can't expect someone else to know. And so I think there's a big self-responsibility piece there as well, to explore on your own. What do you like? What lights you up? Because if you have lived for decades with only getting glimpses perhaps of this, certain experiences, but not many overall, you need to take some time to really find out what lights you up. That's what that weekly date night piece is for. And then you can communicate that with your partner. And if you feel really nervous about bringing certain things up, use podcasts like this as a jumping off point. So it kind of eases some pressure. It's not you saying you want to talk about this thing. It's like, oh, I heard this on this conversation on the art and science of conversations, and they made a really good point. What do you think about it? Yeah.
I love that. I also sometimes from clients, men, mostly men, I'm also hearing pornography. That this is something that they usually, feel ashamed about. They feel this is getting in the way. What's your perspective on that?
I think porn overall is a toxin that is really destroying a lot of not only relationships, but just how people feel about themselves. And it goes both ways. I do see more of it with men, but it absolutely affects women too. I see that quite a bit. So just to normalize that as well. And I will say, like, there can be a time and a place. Some people really get off on the fantasy and the visual stimuli. But where there's a problem is when that's the primary way of feeling pleasure and arousal and reaching orgasm. And when this is, and this is what I see quite often, where it can get to addiction issues. And even if it's not that, it's just that normal routine. This is how I get aroused. This is how I reach orgasm. It's the same thing over and over and over again. And so that's creating like a super highway within your nervous system. This is how I receive pleasure. And so all of those other ways, and I like to think of pleasure as this whole buffet. And sure, like porn can be part of that. Different sex toys can be a part of it. And so is like passion with your partner. So is deeper connection. So is slowness. So is really taking your time with each other. There's this whole buffet. And we want to be able to pick and choose from this buffet as we want to. And so that takes taking time to find pleasure in those other ways. It's a lot harder to show your body, I receive pleasure from like a long, slow, intimate session where it's our hands and slowness compared to toys or quick stimulation. And so we need to open ourselves to that and also normalize that it might feel clunky. It might not come right away. But the more we practice that, the more those neural pathways will begin to rewire for us to receive pleasure in that way. And it can be done. I feel like both men and women can often feel, again, kind of broken that, like, say, male masturbation to porn, it's quick. That's not necessarily what a vagina is going to feel like, right? And same with women with vibrators. It's quick, intense stimulation. A penis or a hand is not going to provide that. And so it takes time to open ourselves up. And one way that can kind of help with rewiring those neural pathways is combining those different pleasure tools. Sure, combine a little bit of porn if maybe that is something you've relied on to like spice things up, and then carry on in other ways. If it's a vibrator's the thing, sure, maybe put that in here and there throughout your session, but also open yourself up to the other pathways of pleasure.
I want to acknowledge something you're doing that doesn't happen very often, because you're using the very straightforward terms of everything, right? Penis, vagina, orgasm, vibrator, things that are very uncomfortable for a lot of people to say those specific words, but also it's not common, right? We don't just say that and like, we're going to go run to the gas station. Also, I need to, pick up a vibrator while I'm at the store. How can people get more comfortable? Maybe they don't have to go so far and like say every single word ever, but how do they get more comfortable if they've grown up in an environment where they used euphemisms for any of these kind of terms, and get more comfortable even describing the feelings they have, the urges they have, what they want to try or explore, or their boundaries?
I really feel like that's something that comes with practice. And the more we do it, the easier it will come. And that can start just with our own thought patterns. Again, this has been rewired over decades to use those euphemisms. And so it starts with awareness, catching ourselves with that. Okay, we're using this other word now. Like another piece that I often see is calling the vulva vagina, where that's not actually the case. The vagina is internal, vulva is on the outside. And even that can start to feel squirmy. People are like, what? Don't call it that. And so I do think it just takes time and practice. Start in situations where you are slightly more comfortable. Like you might feel more comfortable using these words with a good friend or with your partner compared to with your family or while you're out and about in public. So just start small and practice, and it maybe take time to like connect with the other words. How do they feel for you? Where is that discomfort coming from? And since we're bringing up words, I'll bring this up because I think it's really interesting. Vagina, when you look at the root of the word, it means sheath for a sword. So it's literally naming our body part as a place for a penis to go. So I'm not the biggest fan of that word. I like using yoni, which is the Sanskrit word for sacred womb space, and it includes the full pelvic bowl. Pussy has been coming out as like the word to use, kind of reclaiming it for ourselves. And I think it has a certain energy to it. Like maybe when I was in my 20s, it might be like pussy power, but like that's not really my vibe right now. But everyone's going to resonate with different words. And so take the space. Again, your weekly date night, journaling could be a good space to just, what do these words bring out in me? How do I feel when I say that? Where does that come from? Which words do I want to gravitate towards using? And practice that.
You've mentioned sacred. How would you describe sacred? Sacred sensuality, femininity, sexuality.
Yeah. So I am all about sacred sexuality. And how I like to describe that is, again, kind of thinking of that buffet or that spectrum of sexuality. So on one end, we have what can be like the quickie, what we think of masturbation, tying in, porn, vibrators, where it's very goal orientated. It's to have an orgasm, you're done. It's very genital focused. And that energy tends to be very like, poof, orgasm gone. So then we move along more towards slow pleasure. It's bringing in the slowness. It's starting to focus more on the journey and not just the destination. And it's really about connecting with the body, with the sensations, connecting with your partner. And then you can move towards the realm of sacred sexuality, which is beginning to work with your sexual energy in a different way. So my practice is very much rooted in Tantra and Taoism, and it's looking at sexual energy as life force energy. It literally is what creates life, which creates babies. And so it's very potent energy, and we can begin to work with this energy to move it through our bodies, to nourish ourselves from the inside out. And it is very much journey focused. You can use holistic sex tools like breath, sound, and movement to bring in more expansiveness. You can get to the altered states of consciousness and sex magic and manifestation. And it can just be something that's very special and slow and focused on the sensations and that energy.
It sounds like then it's about the connection rather than the doing part. There's the yin yang too, the feminine and the masculine. And it sounds like it's more about the quality and the being rather than just the doing.
Absolutely. It really is like the art of being and experiencing and not just the doing. Yeah.
I wonder, some clients, new parents, that want to do it right, the conversation, how would they start the conversation with their small children? Maybe when children start exploring their bodies.
Absolutely. I think that is a great time for us to grow while teaching our children and starting to use those proper anatomical names. And when we find ourselves getting triggered about certain things that come up, looking at it, where does that come from? Is that my belief system, or was that placed there from my family or culture? And beginning to unpack that. And I believe in just being straight up from the very beginning while keeping it age appropriate. What I found with my kids is they'll ask questions they're interested in and then switch off to something else. I remember one specific day where my son was probably 5-ish, and he was like, "Mom, where do babies come from?" I was like, all right, I guess this is the time. Let's buckle up for this conversation. And I just started out saying how the man plants his seed in the woman and it grows into a baby. And so that was like my basic starting point. And I was giving space for him to ask more questions to see where it came from that. And he like totally switched conversations to like some shark attack or something like that. It's like, oh, okay. And so that's where we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves. We don't need to over explain things. And I think that's where people get in their own way too, is like, is this age appropriate? How much should I explain? Start small. Give them just little bits of information and they'll deepen the conversation on their own. Kids are very, very curious and they're also very destructible. And if they're like very interested in something, they're gonna pull it out of you. And that's okay. That to me is a signal that they're ready for it. And again, age appropriate. You're probably not going to tell your young child going into porn and vibrators and things like that. But once internet is more and more in their life, then absolutely we need to have these conversations. And I think it's very important because if we don't have these conversations with them, someone else is going to. So where are they going to find that information? Does that information align with your family values? So I think it's very important that parents take the rein on having these conversations to be able to set their kids up for success of having that information, those resources that are important for them to have in a way that aligns with your family.
I'll try to put, if I find it, I'll post it in the show notes here. But years ago, when I was working with families, because when I was working with sex offending behaviors, it was with youth sex offending behaviors, and Massachusetts has this really cool guide on like sexually age appropriate development of each age range, and I would go through it, and it would be really enlightening because I think we all bring our own biases of what's appropriate for different ages. And this guide was just, one page for each age was just, this is what it would look like. This is age appropriate. And this is what it would look like if something's gone wrong. And you might want to have a conversation or explore more if you see this kind of stuff.
Oh, interesting. That sounds like a great resource just to have that laid out. And I think one thing that comes to mind is like around self-pleasure and masturbation. It's very normal for very young kids to explore their bodies and to feel good doing that. Yeah. And for me, I feel like an appropriate way is just acknowledging, yeah, that feels good, doesn't it? Our bodies are pretty cool that we can feel that way. And that's something we do in private. That's a personal thing. And giving space for, yes, that feels good. Because if we jump to, that's private, do that in your room, then we'll internalize something's wrong. And then it can be way later down the road. You can expand that self-pleasure conversation.
How would you approach it if you are, let's say you're the partner that's comfortable talking about it, you've done all this kind of work, you've done everything, you've gotten more comfortable, you've understood your boundaries, but your partner is either more reticent to talk about it or shy or whatever it may be. How would you approach that conversation to start bringing it up?
I feel like it takes time and to be okay with that. If someone's quite reserved, like there's reasons for it and that's okay. And there's a bit of a willingness, right? Again, going back to my belief in those long-term relationships, we're there to support each other and love each other. So generally, even when someone's really reserved and uncomfortable, they'll have that openness. They can see that it's important to that partner. And if they don't, as that partner who's more open, saying why it's so important to them, reiterating like, no, I understand this is uncomfortable for you, but this is really important for me for these reasons. Anchor that in. Go slow. And again, start from that intention of we're a team. I want us to explore these things together. And also, I think another important piece is respecting other people's boundaries and what they do and don't like. And being okay that if someone really doesn't want to do something that you want to do, they don't have to. And it might not be a no forever. continuing the open conversations, continuing to explore. Years down the road, things may change, but not to put pressure on that too. I think it's important to have that respect and that safe container with each other, because that's going to create more openness as well.
So it sounds like creating the safe space to have the conversations, and
Yes.
also mutual respect for respecting the boundaries of the other rather than forcing each other.
Yes, I feel like such a key piece of the work I do is setting a foundation of love, safety, and belonging, because our bodies and our nervous systems need that to open up into receiving pleasure. And that starts in the conversations of fully listening to each other. I think that's another piece that comes up, and the book The Queen's Code by Alison Armstrong goes into this in detail, which I think is really great for relationships as well. But generally, women have like all this stuff going on and can just want to talk. And guys, I find, again, generally can use some time to process. And so they'll talk, pause, and that doesn't mean they're done talking. Give them space to process and talk more. I find it can be a bit of a superpower for generally women in the relationships to listen, give space, allow some silence, and generally there's more that comes through. And doing that listening in that way creates that safe container, really gives some good information and prevents things from spiraling and building, because they didn't have a chance to fully see things, and now it goes, and emotions are going, and it goes completely sideways and not where you actually intended for things to go in the first place.
How do you recommend people, or even for yourself, how do you get comfortable or with the idea of taking things slow in the conversation, and creating that safe space and prioritizing that, as opposed to prioritizing, let's just talk about this and resolve this or get to a resolution right now?
That's a great question. How do we get comfortable with that? I think it's kind of getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, because we often feel like we need to have this resolve, and it's uncomfortable not to sometimes. And so I don't necessarily know if there's a comfort to that right away. It's kind of being okay in the discomfort, and perhaps anchoring in the trust you have in yourself and your partner, that you trust yourself to continue to move through things, that just because the conversation may need to end right now doesn't mean it's done forever. Understanding that we need our own processing times. We have our own attachment styles. I see this a lot when there's an avoidant partner and an anxious partner. Often the avoidant just needs some more space before coming back into it, and that's really hard for the anxious person. This is a dynamic I've seen played out in my own relationship, and so they want to keep going, they want to get to the resolve, and it's uncomfortable giving that space. So there's a lot of inner work there, self-responsibility and trust, to be like, okay, we're gonna circle back to this. I want these things, but I know I'm loved. I have this type of relationship. I know we're going to come back to it. And building that relationship with yourself. Like, I'm saying, I'm going to come back to this. I am building that trust with yourself that you're going to do these things that you say you're going to, and trusting yourself to hold yourself through that process, and trusting your partner to show up in the best way they can, meeting them with love, not this frustrating dumb guy or girl that's like not understanding what I'm saying, and like we can put all of these objectifications on them, not necessarily this incredible human in front of us. So kind of bringing ourselves back to away from the name calling and frustration, and just anchoring in love.
I love that. You also mentioned relationship with self, starting there. And there can be a lot of body shaming, both for women and men, where we don't feel attractive enough, we don't feel skinny enough or fit enough. What would you advise to those that are feeling insecure about their own body, and therefore the relationship may be tricky with themselves and their own body?
Yes, that is such a big piece in these dynamics. Those insecurities play a big role in our intimate experiences. And again, I can bring myself back to my relationship. And one thing that was really hard for me that like is seemingly simple was just my own body insecurities. And whenever my husband would go to place his hand around my belly, like I would just recoil. It just like, ugh, don't do that. I don't like that part. It feels fat or squishy and just, oh, like that internal. And like for him, he didn't care. He's just lovingly touching me, but I'm just completely out of the experience now. And so that's where that self-responsibility plays a very, very big role. And when it comes to insecurities, I feel like there's a curve that I walk clients through. One, it's understanding where these insecurities come from, accepting why they're there. It makes sense they're there. I accept these parts of myself. Then going into loving these parts of ourselves. For instance, how we would love a child that is being hard on themselves. No, it's okay. It makes sense you feel that way, but you're actually so awesome. You actually are so great. And then we move to like embracing. And I think people will think of like self-love and body love as we love our bodies and want to like flaunt it and feel so confident all the time and power to those people. But I feel like that's not like the approachable, practical way that most of us deal with these insecurities. And so I think it's just like, again, there's slowness. It takes time for these things. They're quite embedded. But moving through that with ourselves, and of course, I have a lot of different resources I walk clients through and creating that foundation of love, safety, and belonging within themselves, and just being able to, again, love yourself. When you go into meditation, breath work, or pleasure practices, which is a big part of what I do. It's how we can open up our bodies, our subconscious, our nervous system. And when we are in that opened up state, we can begin to reprogram our belief systems as well. So I think that can be really helpful. Mirror work is something simple that can be very edgy and very uncomfortable, especially if those body insecurities are anchored right in. It can be very uncomfortable to look at ourselves in the mirror, and therefore it can be very impactful to just have that simple practice. And as soon as you catch yourself going to your insecurities, what you don't like about yourself, again, bring that awareness piece. And then, okay, what are 3 things I like about myself? Start there. And then again, with that slowness, taking time, you can get more into that embracing. You can get into writing letters to your body of how you felt about it, how you've treated it, apologizing, taking ownership, and then the kind of relationship you want to have with your body.
I'm curious. I love this idea of this connection and slowing things down. How do you think technology is impacting our ability to connect with one another around this? And I don't mean pornography, and I don't mean like, right, just like the idea of having technology all the time and, you know, looking at our phones or looking at TV or whatever. What are your thoughts?
It impacts us huge. I'm like, okay, how can I not go off on a tangent on this? So I'll try to keep it succinct. But I will bring up 2 main things that come to mind. Research has shown there was a study with mothers and daughters that looked at mothers and daughters communicating through text versus through a phone call versus in person in the flesh, and what effect does that have on their body. When it comes to text message, there's barely any effect at all. When it comes to even just the phone call, and even more so in person, our oxytocin and other hormones flood our systems. We're humans that connect through oxytocin. That's why when we hug each other, our oxytocin spikes. It's a feel-good hormone. And so when we are so focused on our phones and texting and videos and the quick dopamine hits, it's disconnecting ourselves from that real, true human connection. And then I will quickly add in a practical thing that really helped my relationship, and I feel like it plays out in many relationships, is when we're talking, catching up on our day after work, whenever it might be. phone pings, go to look at it while we're talking, holding the conversation, seeing what just happened, checking those emails. And we miss out on that real, true presence and connection. Often someone's getting kind of frustrated by that, but not necessarily speaking it. And a really simple way we can take self-responsibility and have boundaries is either twofold: just pause, stop talking. The silence says a lot, and they'll look up, be like, oh, I'll wait. I just really want to speak with you right now. Or you can, again, speak, and it's from that loving side, not get off your phone. It's, oh, I really want you to hear me, so I'll just wait. Let me know when you're done. And incorporating that into your relationship will make a big impact on that connection you feel, and then again help build towards having more desire within your relationship.
That's awesome. Me and my wife a while back started a screenless night, one night a week, where we it's just usually a Sunday night, just so that we can rest from the weekend and get ready for the week. But we won't have the TV on. We won't have our phones. We can listen to music, but we'll just sit next to each other and read or do crossword puzzles or do whatever. Just we don't even have to interact. We just have to like not have technology in front of us. And that's been a really nice way for us to, we don't talk a ton during that, but we still are sharing every now and then. But it's nice to also not have all the stuff going on around us all the time.
Oh, I love that. That is just such a great way to help clear out that noise and just connect in each other's presence, and speaks to that we don't need to be actively engaged with each other to feel connected with each other too.
Jannine, I like to imagine that sometimes people turn on this podcast and then fast forward to this point in the podcast for whatever reason. I don't know why, but you did. I really encourage you to go back to the beginning of the episode. But in the meantime, what are 1 to 2 big takeaways you would want our listeners to walk away with?
I would say some main themes that jump up for me is anchoring in that connection, that slowness, in practical ways, not needing to rush things, but just focusing, prioritizing that connection, and to come from a place of love with these conversations, both with our internal conversations and with our conversations with our partner. We don't need to beat ourselves up. We don't need to beat our partners up. Generally, that doesn't create very much progress. Anchoring back into love, that we are a team, again, whether it's with ourselves or with our partner, and how to walk through this together in a productive way.
Beautiful.
And if people wanted to learn more about you, connect with you, work with you, how would they find you and catch up with you?
I would say the website, JannineMacKinnon.com, is your landing spot for all the things. From there, you will see my coaching, my different events that are going on, my sensual embodiment membership, and I have a free honeypot meditation, as well as a podcast, Unapologetic with Jannine MacKinnon, an approachable space for conversations around sacred sexuality and conscious relationships. So just JannineMacKinnon.com. That's all the things, as well as social media.
Awesome. Jannine, thank you so much for being on this episode. It was so cool hearing your thoughts and learning from you.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.